Let's give a Charleston welcome to Dovie Thomason. I like the Charleston welcome. How many of you are from Charleston? The rest of you are imitating the Charleston welcome? Or what are you exactly doing here? It's kind of nice. You do a good job of it. How many of you, it's your first time here? Yay! Next year you have to bring one person with you. How many of you are here because of someone who told you about this? The power of words. The power of words. A very quick story before I tell you my story. A year and a half. Yeah, really, it is how it works. A quick story about my story. No. A couple of years ago, it's not. It's a year and 4 months ago, I took a fall. I can't remember who told me this last week, but someone said, when you're young, you fall down. When you're older, you take a fall. I took a fall. I took a fall that left me at the bottom of 14 steps on a cement slab, unconscious, my head split like a melon in a pool of blood. Now that'll get your daughter's attention. And for a time after that, I could not read. I could read words, they just didn't make sense when I put them together. I could read sentence after sentence, but they didn't connect. I could read paragraph after paragraph, but I couldn't keep the thread that went through the story. And I would have gotten really upset because, well, I write books. I was in the middle of writing one, which I would look at the notes for the book I was writing. I can't wait to see how this turns out. I hope she finishes it, whoever she is. But at that time, I think I would have gotten profoundly disturbed, far more so than I was. I would have been more disturbed if I hadn't been reassuring my daughter all the time. And once I was through reassuring her, I was starting to believe myself, because I'm pretty convincing. I can be really convincing. And I was starting to believe everything was going to be all right. And one of my fortifying statements was, it's just literacy. I just realized I said that at a library-sponsored event. But before there was literacy and overlapping with it to this very day, there was spoken word, there was an oral tradition, there were people talking, people listening. Children miraculously speak before they can read. No one teaches them. They simply acquire it. It's sort of the way they acquire oxygen. They breathe it in and it comes out not so clear. They breathe it in, it comes out clear. They start stringing words together. And by the time they get to school, they're speaking, competently speaking. And my joy when I hurt my head was, I still speak competently. Written language has only existed 6,000 years. 100% literacy has not yet been achieved by any people on this planet. And as my grandma used to say, first one in our family to read or write or speak the English language, she said, this written language, it's interesting. A lot of rules. Don't always understand it. And besides, honey, I got jewelry older than that. And I would just tuck my little lumpy, bumpy, confused head into bed at night and say, I still know stories. I got jewelry older than the printed written word. And slowly, the words, my hunger for the words, got me back into books. I'm back to writing my novel. But that event, just shortly over a year ago, convinced me that if we have trouble with reading, if we have trouble with writing, I work in the schools a lot. Started off as a high school teacher a lifetime ago. If we have trouble with reading and writing, let's just take a step back and listen and talk. And then we'll get comfortable with words again. Let's go back to where children are comfortable listening and speaking. Adults listening and speaking. Most adults in this country say, recent poll, they would rather have a gun put to their head than speak publicly. These are people who have never had guns put to their head. the interviewees of that particular poll, because I could remember the Gettysburg Address if I had a gun to my head, all of it. Probably the Constitution and the preamble. I read chunks of the Bible once. It would come out, all of it. It's just whatever you need, it's here and I will speak. So a number of years ago, I was approached to write a story. I was a storyteller. I was proud of it. I did the little spiel I just did for you about spoken word, listening, speaking. It is my anthem. I'm committed to it on so many levels. It was how I first learned from my first and greatest teacher, my grandma, who could scarcely read, but told me stories. So I'd know who I was. So I'd know who we were. So I'd know where we fit. So I'd know a history I didn't learn. And so my commitment to spoken word is just powerful. And I got news from a friend that a film was being made about storytelling. And they had already selected their tellers, but she thought I should hear about it. This is a friend, right? I'm like, that's what I was thinking. It's like, oh, thanks. I'm so very happy for you. And then I heard that they had gotten some of these folks you may know if you've been here before. Sid Lieberman, Jewish storyteller from Chicago, one of the great high school teachers that ever lived, and a brilliant storyteller. And he was speaking, he was telling on this thing. Rex Ellis, African-American storyteller, genius, worked for Colonial Williamsburg, got their programs going. I'm like, wow, this is a bunch of... Donald Davis, here this weekend, talking about his Appalachian family and boyhood and ongoing boyhood. And someday the man will grow up, but you know, bless his heart. And so... And then who else was going to be? There was going to be this woman, Carmen Dede, Cuban-American poet. No kidding, what a bunch. And here she was doing the immigrant story, and Donald was doing the Appalachian story, and Rex was doing the African-American story, and Sid was doing the urban Jewish story. And then they had Waddy Mitchell, cowboy poet, and I went, whoa, yes, you know some of these guys. I'm just going, why don't I get to go to this party? A cowboy? Now I want to play the card. But who would they be without us? Those boys did not know how to cut a proper fringe. Or breed a proper pony, for that matter. And then I looked at the lineup from another way. I thought, well, you just don't want to play the card all the time. And it went 4 boys and 1 girl. Or men and women, if you want to use that sort of language. This is an imbalanced lineup. And so I called them and just said, well, I just got a call from Carmen Dede, and then I had a little chat with Waddy Mitchell, and I thought that perhaps you had room for another voice, and they said, probably not. And I went, I bet you do. And they said, well, that means everybody have to talk a little less. And I said, well, that's okay too, because I know these people. And until I push my way into this, I like these people and they like me, and then who knows where it's going to go from that. And they said, no, I'm sure they'd be happy to work with you. We cannot guarantee it. The director has the final say. But you can write something. We'll fly you out here. You can preview it, and if we like, we'll do it. And I thought, well, sure. Now, have you ever talked yourself into something you have no idea how to do? On principle? I had no idea how to write a story. And all of these people, Waddy, poet, Donald, all original material, Carmen, all original material, Rex, all original and traditional material, Sid, original and traditional material. It's like me, I was known for traditional stories, nothing original. I had never written an original story. And so I wrote this. They included me in it. It's a film called The Call of Story. You'll catch it late night on PBS. They put it up for the insomniacs who don't want to shop. That's my market. Insomniacs who don't want to shop. And so let me tell you that story. My name is Dovie. All my life, people have said, oh, that's so cute. What's it short for? I never had an answer. I was not a child that spoke a great deal. I was the kind of child who kept my head down, didn't much want to be noticed. You see, I grew up in Texas in the 50s. All right. Maybe you don't know the back story on the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers, but they were much more popular than Indians. in Texas in the 50s, and we were the only Indian children in the school I went to. I was taunted before we had the word bullying, chased up the pecan trees in the playground. Little boys would grow up to be the future dove hunters of Texas. I would just look at them and say, well, you know, it's a family name, it's an Indian name, it's my grandma's name, and that would get them thinking about some radio drama about Indians who did not speak well, grunted mostly, and were never the hero. School was not a safe place for me. Grandma's house was a safe place. It was a little white clapboard house that always smelled of roses. Year-round, it smelled of roses. Even when they weren't blooming, Grandma would gather up those petals in their time of bloom and put them aside. Some she'd dry to scatter in the dresser drawers. Some she'd mix to make rose water to soften your hands. She said a woman needs to work hard. Women have always worked hard, but they've never let their hands show it. And that goes back as old as her necklace, which the Smithsonian told me is 8,000 years old. And so I go to Grandma's. She had a shade arbor in her backyard. Just poles up and then shade of woven branches over the top. And in the center of that, she had a wood cook stove, old cast iron ones, you know the ones, a real stove. Takes skill to cook on a stove like that. And she'd cook out there. That stove would always be simmering and bubbling with something involving chilies or beans. Cooking on that stove, that smell just wafting up, mixing with the rose water that was Grandma. Hollyhocks, the real ones, the heirloom ones, the old seeds, 6 foot tall, bees buzzing in and out of those blossoms. I can take myself there without closing my eyes. Those smells, that hum of bees in and out of flowers. I'd sit there with my grandma. Now, Grandma used to say, and she was never being racialist, as they say today. She wasn't. She'd even say that. I'm not racialist, but white people are crazy. Note to self, don't take Grandma to school events. She said, this is Texas. It is 115 degrees outside. And these white people, they put on their stove in their houses. Crazy people. Grandma cooked in her arbor in the summer, and we stayed outside where she'd tell me stories. Stories of animals guilty of doing what I thought I'd gotten away with. We were sitting there one day when Grandma heard a call or something. She could hear from a distance subtle sounds, no matter what was going on around her. She'd focus in on what she needed to hear, and then she'd look at me. She had that way of pointing with her lips that the old Indian people have. I do it too, except sometimes kids say, Miss Dovie, why do you love us? And I said, well, how do you know I love you? Because you keep blowing kisses at us. Because I was taught you don't point with your hands. You point like this. And Grandma would point. She pointed like that. Maybe it was a clothesline, a phone line. That's all kind of blurry. Could have even been something like a tree. And the call that was coming out of that space above our heads was a dove crying. And my grandma said, she's going to cry and cry all sad like to one of her babies. One of her relatives answers, and she knows her family's okay. And that's when I got my answer. Dovie. It's not short for anything. It's long for dove. My grandma was named Dove, and the missionaries renamed her in 1890 Dovie because it was a popular name in England that time, and they'd never heard of anybody just named for the bird. And so I was my grandma's baby girl. My first and greatest teacher, but truly my greatest friend. I know I wouldn't stand here today if it not been for that woman's care. But seasons come and seasons go. As a child, they move slow. Seasons come and seasons go, and now I see how fast they can turn. And in their turning one year, they took my grandma. I was alone. I didn't know what to do without my best friend. Well, I had an idea. I was going to become a daddy's girl. Well, honestly, I already was. So I saw nothing unseemly of continuing being a daddy's girl into my 20s, into my 30s, into any marriage or any subsequent marriage. I would be daddy's girl, and that's who I'd be. But seasons come and seasons go. I got a phone call that my mama had died. We'd been estranged for years, but still it hit me hard. Now chances have been taken away. And before I could even recover from that, I got a phone call that Daddy was gone. I didn't know what to do. I was living in a foreign land, Connecticut. The land was strange to me, disturbingly green, unnaturally up and down. Trees that blocked any view of the sun or the four directions. I told Indian people I met in the East, I know y'all pray to the four directions as we do, but you can't be as spiritual as us, because how do you find them? When I'm west of the Mississippi, I always know where I am. In the East, I'd be lost without GPS. I used to go out to the ocean after I got that news. It was the only place that seemed remotely appropriate. It didn't take much effort. I have quite an imagination. I'd look out at the ocean and I'd turn it dry. I'd turn it to sand. I'd suck that water out, replace it with dunes of sand, rolling like the homelands of my people, a place where my family has been for over 12,000 years. And here I was, in this strange land, in a stranger condition. I could not get the word orphan out of my head. Orphan. Orphan. Now I know, and I've heard tell it in the stories, I've been taught that in the old days there was no such thing as an orphan. No such thing as an unwanted child. If a child were unfortunate enough to lose one or both parents, new parents would be chosen, starting with a mother's brother, usually, uncles being special. You see, mothers and fathers, often they see their children, they see what they want for their children. Uncles, aunts, they hear what the child wants for him or herself. I had no aunts or uncles. I was orphaned, generations stripped away, and I wasn't ready. I was just in my early 40s, and I'd never felt so vulnerable and young. I stood on that beach just looking out, trying to imagine home, trying to imagine what I would do now that there was no protection between me and seasons that were speeding up. That was the day I got a phone call. It was sometime between Columbus Day and Thanksgiving. A sad time. For some of us, more than others of us. Imagine a dinner party where you invite a bunch of people and they don't leave. 500 years. They're still sitting there, and then they become your neighbors and everything works out fine, so we're not going to do that. Phone rang. It was one of my best friends from New Mexico, dear friend. One of those friends I hope you've got, one of those people who can laugh and cry at the same time. They're that raw with emotion. Her heart was not on her sleeve. Her heart was in her hand, outstretched all the time. And she was calling me because she was worried about me. All the death in my life, all the loss, all the sorrow. And she had a solution. I was going to come to New Mexico for Christmas. Now, I couldn't think of anything more wonderful or horrible than Christmas in New Mexico. She's from the Pueblo people, ancient enemies of the Apache people. They are the agriculturists, they grew the corn. We are the horse people who stole their corn. They made me pay double the visitor fee at their visitor center last time I was out there. Settling up. I think they were joking, but they have a strange sense of humor. She said, "You gotta come." And I said, "Sweetie, it's so wonderful of you to invite me. It's so dear. But I couldn't possibly. You see, I've just been stripped of everything. I can't imagine being around your family. She's one of those people, Pueblo people, a lot of people with extended families, you know, big ones. They get together, you have to rent a park. 120 people at the last time I'd been at her house for a feast, a celebration. 120 people, we had to feed relatives in shifts. And I thought, surrounded by 120 people who were related, I'd be more orphaned than I felt alone in Connecticut. She heard my reluctance and she said, you gotta come. There's a baby coming. You? You're having a baby? And she said, Lord, no, I am too old for that. Stop it. Don't even say that. And I went, oh, your daughter. And she said, Lord, no, she's too young for that. Don't you even say that. Stop it. And I started naming everybody I knew. And she went, gotcha. I was on a plane. You don't tell me a story without giving me the ending. I was there. And when I got there, I was watching bellies. Because, what do you do? My grandma had taught me that you don't ask questions, you watch. If you ask questions, you'll miss what people want to tell you. You watch. Or as I tell my daughter, look for it before you ask me where it is. Watch before you talk. And so I was watching bellies. And I was trying not to talk. Watching bellies was easy, although I had to be kind of sneaky about it. People get offended after a while. And often when I would say to someone who maybe had just been enjoying the holiday season from Thanksgiving to Christmas over much, and I would say, and they go, I'll work out. After Christmas, I'm gonna get rid of this. And they're like, oh, that's not the one. But not, in order not to speak, I would put tortillas in my mouth. She made homemade tortillas every day. And she'd fill them up with carne seca, quick recipe, jerked deer meat. I guess you could use cows, but it won't give you the same physique. Who do you want to look like? A doe or a moo? I'm with does. Anyway, I digress. Lord. You take the dried, jerked deer meat, you crumple it up, a little bit of butter in a frying pan. Then you take chili peppers, crumble them up, a little bit of butter in a frying pan. You gotta move fast. Those peppers will burn. You toss them together, throw them inside a hot tortilla, roll it up, and it will make you the soul of discretion. I was looking a little rounder than when I'd arrived. It was such a great effort being silent. When one day she said to me, you like those, huh? I said, I do, I really do. And I'm thinking, I have to go home. Christmas had come and gone, and the way it comes in the Pueblos, you know, Santa, and then the butterfly dancers, piñon cookies, and pumpkin pie, Christmas gifts, the deer dancers, the Milky Way, so close it almost tangles up in your hair. Christmas had come and gone. I was going home. There was no baby. She looked at me and said, make yourself another one of those, put it in your pocket. That baby's coming today. I was a little worried. How did they know that? This is the oldest continually inhabited place in North America. How did they know with such precision? I thought, the modern world and the old world doing this dance, learning to be together. How did they know that? But I didn't ask. I got in the car with him, we started driving, and to my surprise, she drove toward her parents' house. Now, I think home delivery is fine. And I know a moment ago there was a midwife in the house. I think delivering somebody's babies is grand. I don't want to help. I'm married to a man who had 3-year-olds, so I wouldn't have to have anything to do with it. I don't want to be there. I don't want to help. I don't want to do it. I don't want to see it. I stuck that tortilla in my mouth and walked in the front door. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. We used the front door. Now, everybody knows the front door is for who? The mailman. Or the census. It's government and it's trouble. You don't really want to go to the front door if you're friendly. Even my UPS guy knows, go around back. Go around back to the side that has a cat. Cat door knocker, friendly. Front door, I will pretend I am not there. Especially if you are carrying something that looks certified. I have figured out the ways of this land. We walked in the front door of her mama's house. There was no furniture in the room. There were people, dozens of people taking their place on the floor, and I thought, oh Lord, I don't want to be here for this. Oh dear, I was chewing on the end of that tortilla. I didn't know how this was going to work for me. I didn't know how long I'd have to be quiet. Her father came and smiled. He said something to her in their language, and then he sat down on the floor. She took me by the arm and said something in their language. I don't speak one of the languages in North America that has no relative language anywhere on the planet. But I could see it was time to sit down. I sat down, and once I got comfortable and everybody else was comfortable, there were babies and arms and toddlers and teens, old and young men and women, relatives, women leaning against husbands who were big like rocks and just as solid and reliable. And her dad started singing. He started singing in their language. I don't know what he was saying. Didn't know a word. But you don't need to know a language to know when you're listening to something holy. He began to sing and sing and sing, and as he kept singing, the night went on. Those stars wheeled around their place in the skies, and he kept singing. And as the night went on, he got stronger and stronger and stronger. He sang all night long. I wish I could tell you the power of that, but I hope you can imagine. And as he sang and sang and sang, people dozed off and woke up. His voice like a tide, just carrying us further and further out and bringing us back. Till at last he stopped. He stood up. He looked at her and just nodded to her. She smiled and nodded back. He pointed to the back door with his lips. Oh, it was good to see someone doing that. And she took hold of my arm and said, it's time to go outside. The baby's coming. And I thought, what is wrong with this living room if we're going to have this baby? But I kept my mouth shut. I was silenced more by his song, by my self-control. We got outside. It was just before dawn. And suddenly the sun started to come up, and it came up slow, like it does some days, turning pink toward gold before it gets to that lavender, before it hits that bright white, golden yellow glory that is sunrise in New Mexico. And as the sun came over the ridge, it hit my face, and it was like a blessing. It was the good feeling of her laughter. When the sun hit my face, her father started to laugh. He touched my face, and he said something that sounded like a long ago memory of a dove crying on the clothesline, phone line. Maybe it was a tree. And I looked at him, and I smiled, completely uncomprehending what was going on. And I turned to my friend, and my question was all over my face, and she said, "You're the baby. You have a father and a mother again. I'd have always been your friend, but now I'm your sister too." Later that night, we sat up in the old home on the top of the mesa where they got no electric, no distraction. I was sitting in an apron, a white apron with eyelet lace like a drift of snow. I was holding a bowl of salt from a sacred lake where the ancestors go to return again and bless us with rain. And Mama said to me, "You know why we took you and made you ours?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I do not." And she said, "It's a terrible thing to lose your parents anytime, but to lose them when you think you're grown up, well, that's dangerous. You're 42. You might think you're a grown-up. You still need old people." And then she told me stories, and I was never orphaned. I was home. Thank you so much, folks.